So I'm assuming that you watched the video, and so the things I want you to think about and that we could talk together online about are, what exactly is happening in that video, and what does that tell us about why we obey. And I think that, one from a social psychology point of view, if you know if one of our goals is to always be part of a group, and I think social psychologists make that assumption, is that we're paying attention to other people, we're thinking about other people, we're obeying other people or hoping they'll obey us, in part to make our groups work, so that we can survive in those groups. And groups work better when there's a leader. It is harder and takes more time, right? Quick versus correct, dichotomy. It takes more time for groups to work and to come up with their process if they sit around talking about them all together. If you think about ancient man, and ancient people, and deciding where to hunt that day to get food to survive, if they sat around all day debating and taking votes and figuring it out, um, then maybe they don't hunt and don't eat that day. But if somebody's in charge and they follow that leader, then maybe they have a better chance of having food that day. And so I want you always to be thinking about what we're talking about in an evolutionary context. I think it's a really important way. There's a famous evolutionary psychologist, Buss, who, and I'm paraphrasing badly here, but essentially says that distress in modern minds is rooted in survival threats in our historic past. And so if you think about prehistoric people and what would have threatened their survival, often those are the social psychological things that we focus on now, even though obedience may be less important to our immediate survival. But we don't just obey. We also conform. And Ash did a study on conformity, right? So obedience is somebody gives you an order and you follow it. Conformity is nobody tells you anything. You just adapt your behavior to be similar to the rest of the group. And so we're going to watch this video, so I'm going to watch this video and think about conformity, and then we'll come back together to talk about that.
Not a public opinion poll. It examines behavior under the pressure of social forces as the experiment of Solomon and Ash. The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the exception of length of. As you can see here, I have numbered the cards. On each card there are 7 lines. It's a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, a 5th person with a white t-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments. 2, 2, 2, 2, 3. Sorry. Great. But on the 3rd trial, something happens. 2. The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence. Ash found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons. What? They must be right. There are 4 of them, one of me. 1. This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct. 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. What should I make, please? 2. In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreement with the group. Here, the distortion is at the level subject stood alone against the group. In this variation, Ash gave the naive subject a partner, here seated in the third position, who also gives the correct response. One, one, two, one, two. With a partner, yielding drops to only 5% of the critical trials compared to 37%.
All right, so when we're looking at this, and we'll come back out of here if I can escape. Hang on a second. So in that video, right, hopefully you saw that even when the answer was obvious, that most subjects, 30, well, not most, a sizable portion, 37%, actually continued to give what they knew to be a wrong answer, or what they would have assumed was a wrong answer, to match the group. And that's what conformity is. And I think that last piece you watched, where they talk about the fact that if one other person in the group is willing to step outside the group, right, if they're giving the answer that is the obviously right answer, that then we go from 37% to only 5% that are going to conform with the rest of the group, so that having a partner essentially. And I want you to think about how often people are giving opinions about something, and a whole group of people are giving the same political opinion, or an opinion about a professor, or opinion about anything, and how at the very least you might stay silent rather than standing aside from the group and saying, I'm different from all of you and I don't agree with all of you. And how often that happens in our everyday life. And again, conformity is about wanting to be seen as part of the group, that we want very much to be seen as part of the group, and that has its roots in what the consequence would have been to be thrown out of the group during earlier times in our evolutionary development. Right, and so this slide essentially talks about that issue that we've been talking about a little bit. And so the last thing I want to talk about here is how we relate to other people. And I want to make sure that you've watched the video on bystander effect. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that, and then we'll resume. Okay?